Hello, and welcome to the Gnostic Warrior radio show and podcast, broadcasting from GnosticWarrior.com in San Diego, California, to around the world. I'm your host, Mo, and today on the show, we have expert alternative researcher and author Stephen Mehler. Stephen is the author of a new book called Land of Osiris, and he operates a website called GizaPyramid.com. Presently, he specializes in synthesizing the theories of academic Egyptology with the arcane wisdom tradition known as the sacred science of ancient Egypt, the true history of Egypt. This is really a great podcast where he goes over some of his alternative theories on why the pyramids were built and what they were used for. There's a lot of things that I truly believe that Stephen says that I have verified with my own research, and that's why we all need to do our own research sometimes into these subjects which he recommends. I just have a quick note to the audience and fellow Gnostic warriors around the world. My goal with these podcasts is to have the world's best alternative researchers, authors, and experts on many different subjects. It doesn't matter what their beliefs are, what their truths are, what their religion is, what race they are. I just want everybody to share the knowledge so I could share this knowledge around the world for free. We are all on our own paths, and we may have many different beliefs and truths, but that's perfectly okay. Let us all agree to respect one another on our paths with our truths and what we find. After all, life is a journey of the soul, and each one of us has our own journey to take to find our own truths. May peace be with you on that journey. Thanks for being on the Gnostic Warrior radio show today, Stephen. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Mo. It's good to talk to you today.
And it's great to have you on. Before we get into the great work you're doing now with your current book, The Land of Osiris, and of course 30 years of research of ancient Egypt and the pyramids, can you please tell the audience about who you are and your background?
Certainly, and it's actually getting close to 50 years of research now.
Wow, okay.
My path, to give the shortened version, I, at a young age, like many people, wanted to know what it's all about. I mentioned in my book, Land of Osiris, the great mystic George Gurdjieff. He once posited 3 questions that every thinking human being has to address in their lifetime. Who am I? What am I? And where did I come from, basically? And for me, quickly I rejected the systems that were given to us, parents, religion, even education. Somehow I didn't think teachers had all the answers. So as a teenager, I rejected religion as a way, and I rejected a lot of what was going down to me from society. So I went on a path thinking science was the answer. Science was going to be where I was going to find objective truth. So I went on a path academically in the sciences. I have 3 degrees in the sciences. I started out as a chemistry major, but higher math was way too difficult for me. So I moved into pre-med. I actually have a pre-med degree in physiology and anatomy with a minor in chemistry. But when I went on to do graduate work, I always had an interest in prehistory. Now, to bring Egypt into it, we have to even go further, because it really goes back to when I was around the age of 8. My mother, to her blessed memory, always kept around the 2 great pictorial magazines of the day. Now, I'm dating myself. I grew up in the early 50s. So this was Life magazine and National Geographic. And the real incidents that, we look back at our life, we remember key incidents, key moments, people or an incident, an event that really shaped our life. For me, it was opening up an issue of National Geographic and looking at a picture of the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. And I was hooked. Now, I wouldn't say that, right then and there, at 8 years old, I'm saying, I'm going to be an Egyptologist. No. But I wanted to know what the civilization was all about. And the Sphinx made an unconscious connection with me. And this is key, and we can return to that, because my connection to this ancient civilization is through the Sphinx. The Sphinx made a connection to me. I wasn't conscious of it at that time. It wasn't until later that I did. But I always had that interest in prehistory and archaeology. So eventually, when I became a graduate student, that's the direction I went into. So I've been interested in prehistory and archaeology since the mid-'60s, late 60s, in fact. And actually, it was in 1968, I came across a book again. It's always these incidents, a book that was actually the last work that Sigmund Freud had done before he died. It was involving with an archaeological site that had been found in Egypt, and a king who had a name Akhenaten. So I became obsessed with this particular king. Freud was positing that this king was actually the forerunner of Judaism, of what we call Mosaic Judaism. Moses was a priest of this king, and this is how Judaism came about. Now, being born a Jew, being born from a fact of 10 generations of Orthodox Jews, either a rabbi or Talmudic scholar, I wanted to know the real origins of Judaism. So this fascinated me. So since 1968, the path of Egyptology has been my path. I did archaeology in the south of France. One a great teacher named Francois Bourg taught me archaeology and geology, and that moved in. And I then self-taught myself academic Egyptology. Now, to bring it up to where we need to be, for years I was studying, wanted to go to Egypt, didn't have the money, things needed to come. In 1987, I had gotten involved in research in crystal skulls, and that can be a whole other discussion for us another time.
Sure.
I've written a book with David Hatcher Childress about crystal skulls, and I was in a booth on crystal skulls at the San Francisco Whole Life Expo in 1987. I met two people who were working for a travel agency called Power Places Tours. We became very good friends. They told me that their group, which was leading spiritual metaphysical trips to Egypt in the 80s, one of the first, if not the first, group to do so, that they used a special guide. That the guide they had was an old man who knew the ancient ways. He knew more about ancient Egypt than anybody else. He had special teachings. Something clicked in me immediately when I heard the name Hakim. They said his name. And I knew I had to meet this man. Again, to make a long story short, 5 years went by. A series of miraculous events happened. I was able to hook into a tour with Power Places Tours with a woman named Nikki Scully, who has been leading tours to Egypt since the 80s. She went to Egypt in 1978 as a publicist, married to the publicist of the Grateful Dead. That's a whole other story to tell. She met Hakim and used him as a tour guide. So, 1992, I go to Egypt and I meet the man who would become my teacher. His name was Abdel Hakim Aoyan. Everybody knew him as Hakim. For 16 years, 1992 to 2008, when he wested or passed, I was his main disciple and teacher. He brought a series of teachings, which we'll discuss, because we have redefined the field as not Egyptology, but Kemetology. Chem was the ancient term in the ancient civilization. And so with his guidance, I wrote the two books, The Land of Osiris in 2001 and From Light into Darkness in 2005. We were working on a third book when he passed. I don't think that's going to get completed, but the work continues, as we can discuss. So it was Hakim's teachings that formed the basis of what we're going to discuss. He talked about that there had been a previously highly advanced, highly technological and spiritual civilization before what Egyptology calls ancient Egypt, existing well over 10,000 years ago. These were the people that built the pyramids, and pyramids were machines, not tombs. They carved the Sphinx. They built a lot of the great ancient stone masonry monuments that we see today that we show people. And so this is what we teach. We have now formed a school. Hakim's second youngest son is named Yusuf Aoyan. He married a woman named Patricia. She came to Egypt with me in 2005, fell in love with Egypt, ancient and modern. Came back in 2007 to do with me Hakim's last full tour. Came back in 2008, met Yusuf, fell in love with him. They got married, and they have now fulfilled what was a dream that Hakim and I had. In the 1990s, we talked about forming a school, forming a tradition to continue his teachings on after he's gone, after I'm gone, to continue the work. We call it the Kemet School of Ancient Mysticism. The website is www.kemetology, spelled KHEMITOLOGY.com. It's founded in 2009 with Patricia and Yusuf. We now lead tours to Egypt, continuing Hakim's teachings to continue the way, and we will do our next tour of Egypt in March 2015. So that is the shortened version that sort of brings us up to where we are.
Yeah, it does. And what really interests me is that awakening you had at 8 years old. After all these years, you say now 5 decades of research, books, and of course connecting with Hakim, do you believe that this was an illumination to possibly who you were in past lifetimes, and Egypt may have been your homeland?
That's a question that can lead to long hours of discussion. Because of Hakim, I have different ideas of what we could say past lives.
Okay.
I believe that we can connect with the energies, the information. We have cellular memory. We can connect, the Akashic record, whatever they want to call it. Okay. We can connect with those who have lived before. Whether we actually were that person or not, we can discuss that. But yes, the Sphinx is key. Now, we can return to that, because the Sphinx is my guide. She, and we'll discuss why it's she, is the supreme. So that when I first came to Egypt, and I met Hakim the first day he was standing in front of the Sphinx, and I looked at her, and I looked at him, and I always make this joke, and he used to laugh when I was to make this joke when he was in present. I would say, I couldn't tell who was older. because he had his face. His face was a man of a million years of wisdom. I
Yeah.
mean, he had this great face.
And what we'll do
but
for
she
the
said
list?
to me,
Go ahead.
Sphinx said to me then, and she has been in contact. So you wanted to know the spiritual connection. The Sphinx talks to me. Now, people can accept that or not, and I don't really care because the Sphinx talks to me continually. And so she said to me right then and there, this is the man you've been looking for all your life. This is my son. This is your teacher. This is your master. And it was from that moment on that I accepted totally that he was my master. And he accepted me as his student. And I because of my background, again, I had a background in archaeology. I already had the academic background studying Egyptology. I had all this other scientific background. I was the perfect student for him because he was also a superb archaeologist. Now, again, to understand this man, his history is incredible. He starts out also around the age of 6. Now, when born into the family, the Awiyan tribe is known as the Eye tribe. They are the eye keepers. They are the wisdom keepers. They keep the history not only of their tribe, but all other tribes. So this was a great tribe he was born into, a family of wisdom keepers.
And you'd mentioned Israel. I believe you had mentioned Israel, and then also that your family is of a Jewish background. Is there a connection between ancient Egypt and Kemet and also the biblical tribes as well?
Yes, and we talk about that in Land of Osiris, and I talk about that more in From Light into Darkness. Hakim taught that the original Hebrews were not Semites. They were not Semitic from origin. They were African people. So that he gave us the teaching that what Kemet was originally made of, and Kem means the black land. Egypt is a Greek word. It really comes from a Greek term, het kapata, Hegipatos, which was just one site, which today is Memphis. It was just one site, the capital. The civilization Chem, the black land, the rich, dark, alluvial soil that the Nile deposits, that was the civilization.
So these original Hebrews, the original inhabitants who had built the Egyptian pyramids and so forth, would have been the race of the black African.
Well, no.
Okay,
no.
sorry.
Let me continue.
Okay.
He gave us a teaching that Kemet was made of 42 tribes. 12 of those 42 tribes were the Hebrews. Now, they didn't necessarily, to get away from this mythology that still goes on today, that Jews built the pyramids as slaves, or Hebrews built the pyramids as slaves. That's nonsense. There were no slaves built the pyramid. So Hebrews may have been involved in building the pyramids, but all 42 tribes. So the key thing is the 12 tribes that became the 12 tribes of Israel were Hebrew. Hebrew was originally a Cometian word, cheperu. It's the plural of the first stage of the sun, cheper. It meant those that were there at the beginning. So the key teaching he gave us right away is that Hebrew, Israelite, and Jew are not the same thing. That's my second book, From Light into Darkness. I differentiate between the three. Hebrews were indigenous Africans, not all black. Some of them may have been black, not all black. The key understanding here is the ancient Cometians were not all black. The 42 tribes, I've had a lot of arguments with African Americans, as you can imagine. I mean, the movement started in the 70s. It was called the Nile Valley School. I know the people that started it. Some African American scholars or pseudo scholars tried to intimate because of racism we weren't recognizing, and it had to do actually with a statement made by the great W.E.B. Du Bois in 1906. This is the first a black man that ever got a PhD and used to teach at Harvard. In 1906, he made the statement that Egyptology is racist because if we look at Africa, Egypt is in Africa, it's not in the Middle East. They must have been black. They must have been, we're not recognizing the true Egyptians. So this was picked up in the 70s when the black consciousness movement came, and it became a movement that all the ancient Egyptians were black. Hakim argued against that. It's not true.
And what would these 42 tribes, I mean, would they be of the same people, or were they kind of hybrid mixtures of various races, and that's how they separated them?
Great question. That is a great question. We believe they are probably all the races that are on the planet. So in other words, Hakim posited, if I argue with some African-American scholars, if they want to, we could say of the 42 tribes, maybe 25, maybe 27 were black African tribes. No problem. But there were yellow people, there were red people, and there were white people. Here's where Hakim differed, again, from academic theory. We're taught that the white race, who we are, Caucasians, supposedly came from the Caucasus Mountains and the steppes of Russia, went across the Aryan invasions, went across India, blah, 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 came to Europe, and that's where the white race comes from. Hakim taught that at one time all the continents were connected. The term is called Pangaea, or Pangea. Now, the difference that Hakim gave us is geologists say continental drift, plate tectonics, our continents shifted hundreds of millions of years ago. If you put all the continents together, I always tell people to do this. If you do a flat projection of the planet, of the Earth, cut them out and you paste them together, you see all the continents fit together. So obviously, they were all one continent at one time, and that's what postulated. The only thing that Hakim differs with is he said the time frame, it could have been a million years ago or less that the continents actually separated. So he contended all races, including the white race, evolved in Africa. So he was what we call Afrocentrist.
And let me add to that a little bit, Stephen. I want to let you know that I had a DNA test, and what is interesting to me is that, when I got the certificate back, supposedly telling me the tribes and the people I descend from, it would be...
I would love to do that. I would love to do that.
Yeah, so it came back the Phoenicians, the Greek Hellenes, and the Celts. So basically, I'm a member of three various people. But
the Phoenicians were Cometians.
Okay.
Again, what we call Kemet, to make people understand, was not just Africa. He used to say it was Asia and Europa. So what we call today Afghanistan, India, not India, Iran, Iraq, all of that through Central Asia was Kemet. Parts of Southern Europe was Kemet. So Celts, it's actually believed that the Druids, who were dark-skinned people, not blonde, blue-eyed like the Celts, came from Egypt.
Okay, and I definitely agree with you there, because I'll let you know I have blonde hair and blue eyes. I live in Southern California, and my family descends from, the Canadians and the French. And my same DNA haplogroup, I have cousins in Egypt. I have cousins that are members of, the Muslim religion, Islam, and so forth in these countries, and they're exact same haplogroup as me. And a lot of these guys are dark-skinned, dark eyes, and actually I'm also related to the Ethiopians who claim to have that type of background. So here I am.
I would love to see my African connections too, because I know. But the fact is, if you walk the streets of Cairo today, you will see every type of human being that has ever been on this planet. Hakim once took me out to a site, and one of the keepers, one of the antiquities police, the guards there, was helping us find it. I looked at this man. He had red hair, red handlebar mustache. He looked like a Scotsman, and this was an Egyptian.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
And can you tell us who was the god Osiris and what did he represent? Do you talk about that in your book, The Land of Osiris?
Oh, yes. In fact, we differentiate the term. The term, ancient term, was Neter, written NTR because vowels were secret. Like even Hebrew today, when Hebrew is strictly written, it's written without vowels. You have to know the vowels. Well, the Cometian language, which we call the Suf language, where the word Sufi comes from, didn't have vowel signs, so you had to know the vowel. So it was written Kemt, KMT. I spell it Khemit. The term Neter, we write it Neter. It's been mistranslated, coming from Champollion through Samuel Budge, the first Egyptologist in the 19th century to write about it, translated the term as god or goddess, as deity. The first one to argue against that is a famous alternative scholar named R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch. If you've ever heard the name John Anthony West, John Anthony West is a champion of Schwaller's teachings. John Anthony West was one of the first to really go against, in the 60s and the 70s, academic Egyptology, saying that a lot of things you're teaching are not right. Well, Schwaller was one of the first in the 50s, writing in French, to argue that Neter was not deity, was not the complete, what we think of as God. It was an aspect of the whole, a principle of the whole. Hakim takes it further. Hakim translates Neter as a sense, like we have 5 senses. But Hakim taught we are innately born with 360 senses. 180 we label feminine, 180 we label masculine. This became what is written on the walls of the temples and the things which Egyptologists think are God and goddess. In fact, there's one tomb where Egyptologists think that they are observing 700 different deities that the Egyptians worshipped, which is nonsense. It was just 160. There were duplicates over and over and over. But the fact is, Hakim taught that these were principles of consciousness, so that each site, each temple that's dedicated to one of these principles, like a temple of Osiris, is dedicated to that energy, that principle. Going to that site activates that sense, that principle within one. That's the whole reason of the temples. It was the whole reason of pyramids, the whole reason of what they think, things that they did in this ancient civilization to continue raising consciousness. So in other words, it is a principle. It is a concept. Osiris, written correctly, Wizard, some people say Uzar or Asar. Hakim pronounced it Wizard, like with a WZ, and said it was the origin of the English words wisdom or wizard. Osiris meant completion. It meant unity. It meant to being in wholeness. So the whole idea of Osiris, the whole story of him being torn into pieces, being brought together by his wife, is that we are scattered tribes. The story is he was destroyed into 42 pieces by his jealous brother Set, who represents the opposite principle, polarity. This coming between people, polarity, separation. So he separates Osiris into 42 pieces.
And this would kind of go in line with the pyramids and what they were built for. But before we get into that, sure. I love the explanation of the origins of the word pyramid, which I would like you to discuss with the audience right now.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Just to continue before that, though, the whole idea is these senses are within us as without it. This is an ancient teaching, which we know from a lot of spiritual teaching today. You can't have God without if you don't have God within.
As within, as without.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the word pyramid, of course, the ancient term is per netter. He gave us a teaching of 5 pers, where per where the word pharaoh comes from, high house, was a woman's house. Immediately we have a discrepancy here. We say, I usually stop here when I'm lecturing, giving this introductory talk, saying there never were any male pharaohs, period. The word pharaoh, Greeks came into Egypt. They were patriarchal. They only knew fathers and sons. They only looked at what was on the walls. They only knew what the priest, only a little bit what the priest could teach them. So they only saw a civilization of fathers and sons. So they thought the pharaoh was the male head of the family. No, per meant the high house, the woman's house. This was a matriarchy. Okay, first of all, matriarchy. There were no male pharaohs. Second is per ba. Ba is like the spirit. So the per ba became the temple, the area where you go to raise consciousness. Per ka was like the double, or the etheric body, or the personality. That's what's put in the tomb with the body, which is Chat or Chet. They put a T ending to it, the feminine T, made this Ka, Chet, or organs or body. But the Ka was in the tomb, so per Ka was the tomb. Now per Neter, the house of the Neter. Well, we just said that Neter doesn't mean God, even though most Egyptologists will translate it as the house of God. No, Neter actually became a word that the Greeks heard when they came in, and they pronounced it Neter. They had their word physis. Physis became their word for the natural world. Physis, where we get physical, where we get physics. However, the Latin-speaking pre-Romans came in, heard the Greeks pronounce this word Neter, and they had their word natura, which is nature. So we say per Neter is the house of nature, also the house of energy. So with that definition, nobody was ever to be buried in a per Neter pyramid. It was not a tomb, not ever intended to be a tomb. It was a machine to produce energy. The Great Pyramid, who I've studied now for going on 50 years, we still have so much more to determine. No one knew more about the pyramid than Hakim, but we can say to you now that we will not be able to catalog in our lifetimes and lifetimes of anybody on the planet now what different types of energy the Great Pyramid produced. We know for a fact produced electricity, electromagnetism, radio waves, quantum waves, hydrogen gas, and many, many other things. So pyramids, in the original intent, built by the Cometians, were houses of nature, houses of energy, to produce free energy. I always say here, Nikola Tesla, who's one of my heroes, was a reborn Cometian. He did not discover free energy. He only rediscovered what was already known.
That's an amazing story. And as above, so below, these pyramids, were they aligned specifically with certain stars or systems above to create this energy?
There's another great question that leads to a whole field of controversy. There are many people that say yes, and many people want to do that. However, we've introduced now another concept that we're talking about this great civilization, but what happened to it? Well, we talk about a cataclysm, a great cataclysmic event. I recommend certain books on this level if people want to follow where I'm going with this. First is my great friend and was also a student of Hakim, Barbara Hand-Clow. Wrote a book in 2001 called Catastrophobia. She republished it in 2010 as Awakening the Planetary Mind. I highly recommend it. She based her work on the book that she published when she was editor of Barron Company called Cataclysm, 9500 BC, written by two British scientists, Allen and Delaire. They postulated that around 12,000 years ago there was a worldwide cataclysmic event. They categorized the event as being what is known as the Vela supernova, VELA. People can Google it. Happened anywhere between 14,000 and 11,000 years ago. It is believed it impacted our entire solar system, not just our planet, but it knocked our planet into its current tilt, its wobble of 23.5 degrees, gave us the 4 seasons that we have. Before then, there were only 2 seasons, and therefore, the sky would have been very different. So we differentiate what we call pre-cataclysmic civilization and post-cataclysmic civilization. Post-cataclysmic civilization is based on what Barbara talks about. Those that survived the cataclysm, and there's where the myth of Atlantis comes from. The whole story of the destruction of Atlantis comes from this actual event. And those that survived had a collective trauma, were deeply traumatized, PTSD to the max. And so they were obsessed with wanting to know if somehow it was an invader from the sky. Something happened where there's a fire in the sky. Something happened. It's a Greek myth that Alan Delaire talked about, the myth of Phaeton, a fire dragon which came across the sky. It probably actually looked like a dragon.
A meteorite, that's what I think of.
Well, I can go on. Robert Schoch thinks it was solar activity. There are different ideas. Many of us alternative researchers agree that there was a cataclysmic event. It's the cause that there's little differences about. But yes, the sky was on fire. No doubt the people saw that. So they became obsessed with trying to predict if another invader came. They invented calendars. They invented astrology, astronomy, and solstices and equinoxes. So we say every megalithic site in the world that is aligned to a solstice, an equinox, or to a star constellation is post-cataclysmic, which means it could be as many as 11,000, 10,000 years old, but it's less than 12,000. So we're saying sites like Giza, the sites I talk about in Land of Osiris, Saqqara, these are pre-cataclysmic sites. They were not aligned to any star system. There were no calendars then. There was no obsession with star movements. There was much more concern with balancing as above, so below, to be sure, but dealing with earth energies on the ground. This is why the pyramids and temples are all on what we call sacred sites. And what we call sacred sites, which my research, almost 50 years now, I say wherever there is what is called a sacred site in the world, a power place, a vortex, there are 3 things present. There's underground running water. There's what are called a source of igneous rock, which is volcanic rock, highly crystalline, like granite, like basalt, like diorite, which the Egyptians preferred to use. And there's a natural source of crystal itself. Those 3 things in combination create the energy fields, which are sacred sites. And what you find in the world today, all ancient peoples knew this. All ancient peoples went to their spots to energize themselves, to build their temples. So this is why in Egypt we can go where there is a mosque. You'll see under a mosque there could be a Coptic Christian church. Under a Coptic Christian church could be a dynastic, or could be a Roman or Greek temple. Under that could be what we call a dynastic temple. And then if we're lucky enough, we can dig under that, we will find an ancient Cometian temple. So it's layer upon layer upon layer that this civilization is built. And everybody was attracted. Hakim used to talk about the Sphinx being the oldest of the old. This is why we'll say it's a she. It was the first thing created above ground. First thing they did was do an amazing feat of hydraulic engineering. And they drilled tunnels through miles and miles of limestone bedrock to bring water from what is today known as the Western Desert, the underground Nile River, to the current Nile Valley, and created the Nile Valley as it is today. So first, before they did anything, it was underground. This is why we go underground. And we found the most things underground. And the thing that we only agreed with Zahi Hawass, the former director of antiquities, on one thing. He used to say less than 18% of what's under the sands of Egypt has been found, excavated. And we agree. There's so much more yet to be found.
So what you're saying...
So the point is, then the tunnels were built. Then they wanted to make a manifestation. To them, the sky was what they called Nut. Again, we're saying this is another deity. People look at this as goddess, but this is not goddess. It is a principle, the principle of creation. N-U-T, Nut. She was the mother of the sky. Her, all in the tombs, all in the coffins, they would have constellations. That was her body. All the stars were her constellations. So Nut was the Great Mother. So when the Great Mother decided she wanted to manifest in physical form, she spit. Where she spit is the Sphinx. because her name is Tefnut, the spit of Nut. Now, why spit? Hakim, people would ask him all the time, why are you talking about spit? Listen, we'll use the scientific term. Every time we expectorate, it's never the same. And there's no volume, it's no mass. It can't be weighed. You cannot define the Great Mother to the ancient people. But if you must, we'll build a statue to her. So that was it. So that's where she landed. The spit landed. Tefnut is the Sphinx 54,000 years ago. Before anything else was built above ground, they carved her image. But Hakim would say, even 56,000 years ago, before it was just a limestone outcropping, which is called in geology a yardang. It was just, well, if we go to Egypt today, where the chin of the Sphinx is actually the base level of the plateau. So where she is, she was actually all carved out of her own hollow, and they took all those blocks and made the two temples in front of her. So tremendous feat, carving out this rock from the bedrock, carving her out of the living rock. Well, 56,000 years ago, people went there just to energize themselves. So they knew the energy was there. So when it came time to manifest something, they carved the Sphinx, and she's 50. He just calmly said, the first thing he said, the first day I met him, while I'm looking at the Sphinx, he's telling me, this is the man, this is your man. He calmly says to us, the Sphinx, she's 54,000 years old. This is 1992. Blew me away. And that was it. I said, this is my man. This is the teacher. So she's first, then the pyramids. And then the pyramids are built to use the water that's coming through these underground tunnels. The water was the source of the energy. We have never needed fossil fuels. We've never needed atomic energy. We've never needed this. We've never needed that. Water is all we've ever needed. For thousands of years, these pyramids were functioning as a grid line. And we're talking about many pyramids now, functioning as a grid line, and all tuned to a different frequency of sound. So we can bring sound into this too, because sound is key. First thing, when I came into the field to work with Hakim for real, 1997, I came to Egypt for 3 weeks to work with him. He took me to places where nobody else ever goes to. I met people, I saw things today which I can't even fully describe. But he said to me, my work was to concentrate on sound and water, the knowledge that the ancients had, and the interplay of both. And that's the secret to what I'm working with, sound and water. And the Great Pyramid is an acoustic machine.
And what was the purpose of them going in these pyramids? Was it an initiation, or was it to re-energize themselves? What's your theory there?
This is later. Remember we said per Ba is the temple, per Neter is the machine. When it was fully functioning, fully operating, no one could go inside. They would have been fried, absolutely fried with the energy that was there. It's only in modern times that pyramids have become temples. But next to the pyramids were temples. This is where the people would go and bathe in these energy fields. So I say to people, when looking at, when I talk about land of Osiris, I'm talking about sites from Dashur in the south, Abu Rash in the north. A bunch of sites, all had stone masonry pyramids, were all aligned in a grid line, all each pyramid tuned to a different frequency of sound. So it was an ancient grid. So when this grid was functioning, this entire civilization was bathed in infrasound for thousands of years. I believe this is the origin of the patriarchs of the Old Testament. Cometians lived hundreds of years. They had no viruses, no bacteria that would bother them. Their immune systems were in optimum form. They used sound for healing. They used sound to overcome gravity. That's how they built the pyramids. Sound to create an anti-gravity field. The only way. Hakim would look at us and would say, look at all this weight. Look at the weight. The Great Pyramid is estimated to weigh 6 to 7 million tons. It's estimated to have anywhere between 2.5 by computer estimation to 3.9 different million blocks of stone. To do that, he said, the only way is to overcome the gravity. Only.
Did the Greeks and the Romans know about this, and once they had conquered Egypt, they concealed this? So you don't think they concealed this information?
No, I don't even think the dynastic Egyptians do. That's the key. By the time we have dynastic Egypt, this comes in again about 3100 BCE, they don't know how to do that anymore. They just use what's there. They are the great reusers. They recycle, reuse what the ancients left them, and they make their temples and they reuse pyramids. However, pyramids were never used as tombs. They were used as symbolic tombs by the dynastic people, but they have never found an original burial in any pyramid in Egypt, and they never will. Because the pyramids, they were built later as symbolic tombs, because they thought They want to identify with the great ancient people that built them, but they didn't know about machines. This is why the Great Pyramid becomes a temple of initiation. After the Cataclysms, 12,000 years ago, the Great Pyramid ended its function primarily as a machine. It's still producing infrasound today. This is why people can still get that great spiritual buzz, that high, if you will. When we go in the pyramid, we tone, we chant, everybody gets stoned, whether anybody believed it or not. I've had the most skeptics. I've had men dragged to Egypt by their wives who were totally into it. They couldn't care less. They go in the Great Pyramid and they come out, yes, I felt something. I did feel something. Everybody feels something. But it wasn't until it ended the Cataclysm, where it was no longer a machine, that it began to be used as a temple of initiation. And all the great initiates, I believe, like Akhenaten, like Jesus, like Moses, were all initiated in the Great Pyramid. But it was never intended to be a temple of initiation. That's the per ba. It was a per nectar, house of energy. In its original attempt, as I say, the energy was so high in there, we would have just vaporized.
So this cataclysm would have done away with all the machinery and advancements they had before it, and after
it would have damaged it. This is again. You bring up a great question, and I have to bring in a great colleague of mine here who's super important to this work. His name is Christopher Dunn. He's written a book called The Giza Power Plant. His new book, 2010, is called Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. He is a master engineer, 50 years in space age engineering. Nobody knows precision and machining what Christopher does. He went to Egypt in 1985, was fascinated about the Great Pyramid, went back in 1995 with Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock, did a video, and wrote this great book in 1998, Giza Power Plant. He and I met in 1997. We've become great friends and colleagues. Nobody knows machining and precision like he does. And he said that the question that's always asked to us, where are the machines? Now, we can show you things in the museum which we think are remnants of the machines, but I believe the machines would have been so important, and they were diamond tools, that they would have been broken down and reused, and we may never find an intact, pristine, virgin, ancient tool that may have been broken down and reused. But that is the great question, where are the machines? But we can show evidences of the machine name. We show you the tool marks. We show clear evidence of diamond tool marks, machining of the highest speed drills in granite, in basalt, in diorite. I mean, the hardest stones on our planet. And
there's no way they could have been polished and cut and carved without machines. There's just no way.
One other only example we use is we think the polishing may have been done with acids. They may have actually used liquid abrasives that we see polish on these boxes. There's an area which is one of my favorite areas to take pictures. It's just been open to the public since 2013, actually 2012, late 2012. Hakim took me in 1997. It's called the Serapeum. It's at Saqqara. It's an underground vault of boxes. Supposedly, they were sarcophaguses for bulls, that they worship bulls. No bulls were ever found, no mummies were ever found. But these boxes are incredible. They weigh almost 100 tons. They are huge, out of basalt, granite, and the polish on these boxes is like the finest mirror shine. You can see your faces in this granite. And so at first we thought, well, they must have these really fine polishing tools. But Yusuf Awiyan has found some things in the last couple of years which tend us to believe that they may have used abrasives. They may have used acid actually to polish. But no doubt, to cut and to shape the stone had to be done with machines. In other words, you look at these boxes, they're huge boxes. Chris says how it's done today. He went to modern people in manufacturing, modern people who work in rose granite. And this rose granite in Egypt is 45 to 55% rose quartz crystal, which means that the tool that hits it has to be at least 7 on the Mohs scale, MOHS. It's a geology scale that measures the hardness of stone, diamond being 10, of course, and quartz is 7. So this rose quartz granite is at least 7. So you have to have something at least as hard as the quartz to cut it, and only diamond really works well. So he said how they would do it today is they would make a box by making 4 different sides and then hinging them together. These boxes were made out of one piece. This was carved out, grounded out with perfect right angle corners, perfect squares, perfect. He said it can be done today, but nobody would do it because it wouldn't be cost efficient to do a one solid piece. And even the lids, which weigh another 30 tons, the box itself weighs 70 tons, hollowed out. So it must have weighed hundreds of tons as a solid piece. But the lid itself is made from the same piece to match it vibrationally. And it fits so perfect. It couldn't be done today. Nobody could afford to do that. It would take billions of dollars.
these granite, tombs or in the Serapeum, was this used for the people to go into to re-energize?
No, again, these were not tombs, these were not sarcophagus.
Well, not tombs, I'm sorry, but...
We call these boxes resonance boxes. Like in the Great Pyramid, we don't call that a sarcophagus. Nobody was ever buried there. It is a resonance box. No, so we think, like Chris Dunn labels the Great Pyramid a power plant. I think the Serapeum was a power station. So I think there may have been water going through there. This was all for sound, for resonance, for continuing this energy that was produced. They constantly were using these as generators, amping up, step-up generators, step-down generators, amping up the energy that was produced. So this civilization was constantly bathed in infrasound and free energy. Constantly.
They sound like they were master alchemists that would work on perfecting their energies. And I know these stones that you keep mentioning, they're of high alkaline. And I know that humans, when they have high acidity, that's when they start getting sick and they start producing parasites and worms that start putrefying their flesh.
Very good. Very good. And the word alchemy itself, one of the ancient Egyptian Arabic words for Egypt is alchem.
And I know that was interchangeable.
Before it was al-Misr, which it is today. Egypt is called Misr. It was alchem. That's where the word alchemy comes from. I define alchemy as the arts and sciences of ancient Kemet. So what they did, and we have many, many examples of it, they would take known materials, take known elements, mix them together, and there's what you come in with the term magic comes in. What does the word magic mean? Magic comes from the Magi, who were the wisdom keepers of Babylon, Chaldea, the worlds of the Magi. These were the Cometians. It's the same techniques. So you have a technique of taking known materials, putting them together, and making a complete unknown. That is alchemy.
Interesting.
And we think it was invented in the Middle Ages from people who were trying to change lead into gold. That's just a ruse. The greatest student of alchemy was the great student of Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung. Thank you. Whoa. Carl Jung, who thought that alchemy was actually a psychological process. It was refining the self, perfecting the self. And indeed, that was part of the system. Of course, there was no separation in Kemet between spirit and body. No separation between mind and spirit. There's no separation between spirituality and technology. That's why we call the Great Pyramid a spiritual machine. There was no separation there. So everything that they did was a spiritual experience. Everything was involved in infrasound, in chanting, in carrying this great spiritual energy. And that was also their technology. So there was no separation. But unfortunately, in our modern mind today, a lot of people will just want to talk about the technology, the nuts and bolts, or just the spirituality. They don't want to bother with the technology. But we call our tours techno-spiritual tours because you cannot separate it. We will give you a spiritual experience and teach you the academic, intellectual if you want to.
When did they stop becoming spiritual? Because you'll see several hieroglyphs, paintings, and different texts talking about wars and fighting different tribes and races. When did that start? Do you know?
Now you move into my second book. That's From Light into Darkness. That comes with the coming of religion. Now, again, in my book, From Light into Darkness, I make a major distinction at the beginning of the book that spirituality and religion are not the same thing. Academia teaches that they are. Academia teaches psychology, sociology, anthropology, those that study the subject, or even religious studies, that we've always been hardwired for religion. We've always had a sense of God. Even primitive people had the sense of religion. I say no. We're hardwired for spirituality. We're hardwired once we become some degree of consciousness to understand that there is spirit that's more than the body, that we are more than the body. That's spirituality. But religion comes in this last phase. Again, we talk about 5 stages of the sun. 5 stages that the sun makes daily cycle. Keper, Ra, Un, Aten, Amen. There's the 5 stages the sun goes through daily. But they also represent stages of our developing consciousness and stages of our prehistory. So there was a stage, Aten, the highest stage of development, where we built the pyramids. That's when Kemet was at its flowers, 14,000 years ago, 15, 20,000 years ago, where we built all these stone masonry pyramids and had this incredible technology. This phase we're in now, the 5th stage of the sun, is called Amen, or Imen. It is characterized by having no image, night, darkness, polarity, separation. All is veiled. So when I'm giving a lecture, I mean, it's quite obvious now, but it used to be when I start out giving a lecture and I talk about the 5 stages of the sun, I would stop and I would ask the people and say, now, which stage do you think we're in now? Now, many people have not been on the path or just go along with the media. Oh, we're in the highest stage. Of course, we're the highest stage of humanity that's ever been. And that's the thinking today, that we on the planet today are the sum total of all humanity, the greatest thing that's ever been on this planet. In essence, it's true and it's not true. We are the sum total of every other human that's lived. That's true. But we're not in the highest stage. We happen to be in the stage of Amen, the fifth stage, the lowest stage of consciousness. And we've been there for 5,000+ years. What does that correspond to? The rise of Judaism, the rise of patriarchal religion, and the rise of institutionalized war. What is the last 5,000 years? And I am a student of history and prehistory, so I can speak to this. 5,000 years have been noted by the creation of patriarchal religion and institutionalized warfare. Were there wars before 5,000 years ago? Yes, there were, but they were never city-state wars. They were never institutionalized warfare as there has been. And if you look at the world today, my wife and I were watching the news today. She said, how many wars are going on in the world today? Well, I said, at least 4. If you think about Syria, Iraq, you got Ukraine, Afghanistan, and Africa against Shabab, Somalia, and all of this. So at least 4. There's more. So there's constantly been war. My lifetime, I'm 68 years old. I've never known a United States that was not at war. I mean, this is it. World War II was supposed to end all wars. Where did Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan, Iraq come from? Where are we going now where it looks like the U.S. is going to go into Iraq again? I mean, no. This is patriarchy. This is the age of Amen, Imen. This age of separation, keeping us separate. The reason why Hakim brought his teachings to the forward, why he found me, everything is for a reason, why we came out with these books, if the age is over now. This is the same thing as the Mayan calendar, same thing as December 21st, 2012, all saying the same thing. This 5,000+ years is over. We're going to a new dawn, a new consciousness. That's why we're talking. That's why we're sharing it. That's why you're doing what you do.
This, Stephen, for the listeners out there in the audience, this is not an overnight thing. It's a transition from the old to the new, correct? That takes decades, hundreds of years, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And in fact, great point you pointed, because it's the same thing in astrology. You have cusps when you go from Aries to, and you go from Leo to Virgo. There's a cusp, so that you have what always is. So this is a cusp. I think the Cataclysm actually happened towards the end of the last age of Hakim. Wasn't the age, but it then led to thousands of years of transition, which in archaeology, Barbara Hancock calls the blank. From the time period of 12,000 to around 7, 8, 9,000, there's a blank in the archaeological record. We don't see where the civilization continues because people had to restart. Basically, the Cataclysm destroyed most active civilizations, and humans still had consciousness waning, but had to restart. So yes, there is a transitional period. So we are in a transitional period, like moving into the age of Aquarius. If you talk about it astrologically, it takes 100 years or so of transition. So yes, we're in the transitional period, but Hakim said it was inevitable. This is the key why we always end our talks, always end our speaking with the most positive, optimistic of note.
Yeah, and this
Hakim was supremely positive that we're going into another age, another dawn, another Kepler, a new dawn of consciousness. Nothing can stop it. No systems in the world, not the warmongers, not the Bilderbergers, not the elite, etc., whoever you want to name, they cannot stop the inevitable. And they know it's coming, and they're trying like hell to hold on to their physical power. But it can't. It's inevitable. It's whether we go peacefully, whether we go helping it, whether we become the scarab beetle that pushes the ball of dung in front of it, which they saw as pushing the sun up at dawn. We have to be the scarab beetle. We're the light workers. We're pushing it. But even those that are totally ignorant, totally unaware of it, either they're going to go kicking and screaming or they're not going to know. It's a transition. It's going to happen. And it's happening every year. Every year, Hakim would say, it magnifies. It's exponential. More people are waking up every year.
Is this evidence, Stephen, in how we're allowed to talk about this, or we're giving free reign for you to write books like this, and for me to, of course, have this podcast and my blog and talk about truths that several centuries ago we would have been easily burned at the stake within minutes for what we talk about?
Definitely so. We chose to come here at this time and be part of this great movement. All the people that are here, yeah, I agree. And
then also with us being here in the West, where we're allowed to have this freedom of speech for now and hopefully this last, that would also be indicative of us being born here and being light workers as well in part of the Western world, where if we were born in the East, we probably wouldn't be talking about these things.
Agreed. And again, it is all relative.
Okay.
We do have freedom of speech relatively. I mean, unfortunately, Edward Snowden doesn't have freedom. but
there's limits on that, right?
Right. It was, but again, I understand where this comes from. The whole idea of the U.S. was a Rosicrucian Masonic experiment. Rosicrucians and Masons were those who kept the old ways from Egypt. Again, even in this 5,000 years of darkness, I always use the yin-yang symbol as a great example, because you have the dark side, but there's a spot of light in it. You have the light side with a spot of dark. So even in this 5,000 years of cycle, you've had a Jesus, you've had a Moses, you've had a Guru Nanak, you've had all the great masters and teachers that we've had coming along and still bringing the light forward. And now we're moving towards the end. We're able to bring these teachings forward. It's true. Hakim knew the timing of it. I mean, he was looking for someone like me for many years, but no one came around. I came around, and he knew this was the time to really trust somebody, to give it all out, and to give it going, because it has to continue, has to pay it forward. We have to continue this and bring more and more in every day. So you're right. It is the time. We chose to be here, to be a part of this push. It's not easy. It's very frustrating. Every day it's very frustrating because it's always darkest before the dawn. And we're in very, very dark times now.
I love that statement. I often use that as well, Stephen. It's always darkest before the dawn. Are the Freemasons or the Rosicrucians descendants or custodians of this hidden knowledge?
To some degree, yes. So many, many groups also, yes.
Okay.
Even the Illuminati. Here's a term that's totally misused. Illuminati. Everybody uses it today in the so-called New Age as to represent the dark side, the ones that want to control the world. Well, Adam Weishaupt was an intellectual man, actually a doctorate, who formed the Illuminati to go against the teachings of the church that were trying to keep people in ignorance and darkness. He preferred science and empirical knowledge over just beliefs. So the Illuminati started as a reaction to church repression, and eventually became corrupted to what we think it is. The same thing with the Masons. The Masons have been corrupted. Some degree, Rosicrucians have been corrupted. I was very much an active member of the Rosicrucians, had access to their archives. That's another part of my background, how I knew, went back to Egypt, went back to this particular King Akhenaten, who was considered to be the first Grand Master of the Rosicrucian Order. So yes, they are the repositories today, but it is almost like now it's up to each individual to find their own path, not to depend on systems or other school, because each system that I have ever gotten involved with always falls to the human condition of ego, of pettiness, and corruption. So I left the Rosicrucians for that reason. I still consider myself a Rosicrucian. Rosicrucians are supposed to consider themselves walking question marks, question everything. And so I still strongly adhere to it, but I'm not an active member of the organization because I saw the same thing that I saw happen in so many egos, power trips. I know more than you do. That's characteristic of the last 5,000 years. So it behooves anyone wanting to go on the path. It's great to find a teacher, of course. We all want to find that teacher. But it's best to, even to do it self-taught now. Go a lot on your own. Don't worry about organizations like Rosicrucians, Masons, etc., because they tend to become social clubs now, have become corrupt.
This corruption, would you believe, is the result of the various people and the egos, or did some organization take it over and basically are running it as a parasitic organization?
It's both. It's characteristic of this time of image, to separate, to create us and them. The basis of every religion or every nationalistic political system is that there's an us and there's a them. We have to have an enemy. We have to have an opposition. There has to be a devil. There's a great, great relief that Hakim had a teaching that only he taught. There's a temple in Egypt called the Temple of Edfu. It's a temple of Horus. Horus is supposed to be the initiate, the enlightened one. It's the boy that becomes a man through initiation. So there's a series of teachings at this temple that is the myth of Horus, how Horus comes to be. His father is Osiris, his jealous uncle Set destroys his father. Horus is born through magical mating, again, alchemy or procreative alchemy. Isis conceives herself on the dead body of Osiris, although she does not find his phallus, his penis. The only part of his body she can't find. She magically recreates it. So here's the first instance of alchemy, procreative alchemy. She magically creates his penis, impregnates herself, and gives birth to Horus. Hor, the Avenger. So he fights his uncle. He defeats his uncle. So his uncle changes into many different shapes. A little sea creature, a creature. So all on the walls of the Temple of Edfu, Horus, shows the scene of Horus in a boat with a harpoon, and he's stabbing this creature which is called Typhon or Apophis, or Apep in the Phoenician word, which is a little sea creature which his uncle said had changed himself into. Well, one of the scenes Hakim would take us to, and say, come closer. And you'd see that coming from the harpoon, there was another line that somebody had drawn in red ochre paint, going down and missing missing the beast. And Hakim would say, this is the story he was told by the keepers of the temple. Again, this is how he got his knowledge. As a young boy, young man, he studied with Sufi masters, went all around Egypt and learned from all the keepers, all the secrets of every site. He was the only one that put every site together and created a system. So what he was told is that one day during dynastic times, this was a teaching temple. It was a great teaching temple. A priest would teach, the young priests would come in there and they would learn all the secrets. So one day a high priest came by with a group of initiates staying there, and he drew this red ochre line. And he would say, look, the truth is, we can't kill the beast, or we're out of a job. There always has to be an antagonist. So there's the secret teaching. The whole basis of religion, you have to have the enemy. You have to have the devil. You can't kill the beast, or you're out of a job. So he's actually showing slaying the beast, but in secret, the priest is saying to them, really doesn't kill the beast, or we would not have a job. There'd be no temple of Horus. There'd be no telling of the story. So we can't kill the beast. No one, no tour guide, no other place else in Egypt ever showed that teaching. But Hakim, of course, I've showed it to every group that's with me. You have to go real close to see this red ochre line, lightly drawn, missing the beast. You can't kill the beast, or there's no religion.
What's interesting is that story of Isis and Osiris, and of course having Horus without any phallus or sexual act taking place. It almost sounds like an ancient story of artificial insemination, but I know that isn't correct.
No,
right?
It could be that too. I mean,
Okay.
a lot of people go there with that. You know, if you follow the work of Zechariah Sitchin and the Anunnaki, they were doing those kind of experiments. And people believe that, but it's basically a sign of alchemy, of the magic. Because again, Isis represents all magic, all alchemy. She's the queen of that. She's the patron of that. So she can magically create it. So they obviously they believed in magic and they practiced magic.
That would be the reason Isis, of course, would be the head pharaoh in the later kingdoms. Why did the Greeks go from having, men pharaohs and so forth, the male, to having female at the end? Do you know any?
No, I don't follow that. Greeks always had male. The reason, what you may be thinking is Cleopatra was the last ruler of Egypt, but she usurped her brother and her father. She was the pharaoh. And interesting is, I point out, and I actually got a master's degree from San Jose State University in the Women's Studies Department on the role and position of women. That's how I started before I even met her, 1978. And I pointed out, the first ruler of a united Egypt was a woman, and the last ruler was a woman, Cleopatra. She was Cleopatra the Seventh. So, but the Greeks did not recognize the role of women at all. They saw it was only men, fathers and sons. That's why all the dynasties, all the Egyptology books talks about male pharaohs and their sons, male pharaohs and their sons. Maybe they'll throw in Nefertiti once in a while, or Nefertari, or Hatshepsut. Once in a while they'll talk about the women, not realizing that the women were the power. That descent went from mother to daughter. There's numerous occasions of lawsuits in the Middle Kingdom of Egypt where brothers are trying to sue their sisters for control of the land, and they always lose. First of all the judges in ancient Egypt were women. There were no male judges. But the women always won. It always went primarily descent from mother to daughter. It's not till the Greeks come in, till the later days of Egypt, where it starts to become patriarchal, and then of course you get Coptic Christianity and Islam coming in. But Egypt was a matriarchy up until the last ruler, which was a woman, Cleopatra the Seventh.
What is your theory, Stephen, as to why the women had ruled and why they held the women in such high veneration? It
was, again, from their view that creation was feminine, that it wasn't equal, masculine and feminine. Nut was the creator of all there is, all that exists, and all that is yet to come in existence. So they saw everything coming from women. They saw human body. I mean, they naturally made the conclusion. They understood that sex created babies. I mean, supposedly in the Middle Ages, Catholics didn't even know that. But in 10,000 years ago, they did. And so that they knew that women were the source of life. Women were to be venerated. I mean, patriarchy is an aberration. I mean, I can't say it any other way.
No, and I'm trying to...
You look at dolphins. Dolphins are not a matriarchy, especially orcas, killer whales. The whole system is based on the female clan. And again, Egypt was that way. A man's biological father was not important to him. It was his mother's brother who took the role. And the same thing happened with Hakim. His first great teacher was his mother's brother, his uncle, who took him at the age of 6 to a Sufi master, and the Sufi master had Hakim memorize the Quran. I say that again, not just learn the Quran, memorize the Quran. He knew every punctuation, every period, every jot, every word, every phrase, and yet he was not a Muslim. But to understand it, the teaching was you have to understand this to get beyond it. I had to read Torah. I had to understand the Old Testament to go past it. You can't just reject these things without not experiencing them. And that's why whenever there was a discussion in Hakim's house and there was an argument about a phrase in Quran, he had all these friends would always argue, no, it's this, no, it's that. Hakim said it was this, no, no. Hakim would call his daughter, Mariam. She would bring them the Quran. He would open it up. He was always right 100% of the time. Jot, period, dot, phrase, totally on. So that's how he started at 6 years old, memorizing Quran. And to go past it, you have to understand this age of Amun, what Judaism, what Christianity, what Islam is all about, how it came to be, to understand that there was something before, and something that existed for thousands and thousands.
Yeah, what's interesting is we have the religions today, which of course are the Abrahamic Judaic religions, and they seem to be patriarch, but also they highly venerate, the woman, such as in Catholicism, we have the Virgin Mary, we have the priest who have the feminine wear that they wear, and then over in Islam we have the black cube, and then also the crescent, which is reminiscent of Venus. Is there any relation there to the priest concealing this?
Absolutely. Now again, you still have the matriarchal remnants. They couldn't wipe it all out. Again, you missed Judaism. Judaism, you are considered a Jew only if your mother was Jewish, not your father. And the Nazis knew that. The Nazis used that to get records, birth records, to find Jews in the 30s in Germany. Because in Orthodox Judaism, you're only considered Jew if your mother was Jewish, born Jew, not converted, born Jew. If you practice, you become Catholic or Islam, you're still considered a Jew in Orthodox Judaism. So there it still remains. There are in Judaism what are known as the mother letters. Certain key words like the shin, like the hey, they are called mother letters. They represent a secret name of God. Mother letters to a patriarchal male image. So still the remnants of Egypt are there. Still the remnants of thousands and thousands and thousands of years of matriarchy still creep into patriarchy, as you mentioned. Definitely still there.
And the
Nazis used that. I mean, the Nazis knew that. And they went through birth records on the mother's side, not on the father's side. And you could have been 5 generations removed. But if they found a mother on the female side that was Jewish, they considered you a Jew and you were going to the camps. Whether you had been a practicing Lutheran for 300 years didn't make a difference.
Wow, that's interesting. So this wasn't just an attack on being a Jew and a member of religion, but a specific race they were going to target.
Yeah, they considered it a race. Yeah, they did.
Yeah, and I know they had went into the Mediterranean, into Crete, to seek out the Jews. I read a story of that. They were high up in the mountains, and the Nazis went there and they fought with the Cretans and the Jews. There was about 100 of them, and they went to find them everywhere. So
what's even another story that's even more ironic is the relationship between Iran and Israel today. Before it was called Iran, it was Persia. When it was Persia, it happened to be one of the greatest enemies of the Greeks in the ancient world. But the Persians, we tell a story about what really the Exodus, what really Judaism is about, is this king Akhenaten, his teachings, and his high priest, who was named Ramos, Ramisu, where the word Moses comes from, leads his followers out of Egypt. He tries to go back to the old ways, to the ways of Aten. The priests of Amun have become corrupt, have destroyed any kind of spirituality. So he wants to return to the old ways. So he wants to go back to the time where everybody had a connection to the divine. So that was his teachings. So his teachings fail in Egypt. He's either murdered, his whole system wiped out, but his followers leave Egypt and they become the Israelites. They become eventually the Jews. They were Hebrews. So this is what I had this contention long before I met Hakim. Hakim just reinforced it according to his tradition that what was the Exodus was the priests of Amun chasing the followers of Akhenaten, the Atenites, out of Egypt. And that became Judaism.
What is your theory on where they had went?
They went not just to Canaan, they went to India too. There's no doubt that there are people in India called Dravidians. They are very ancient people. They look Jewish. You could look at them as any Jew in Israel or any European Jew, they look Jewish. So it's contended that some people didn't stop in just Canaan because supposedly Moses had promised the people milk and honey and flowing, and they came, this is desert, this is not where we're going. And they went on to Srinagar, to what is known as Kashmir in India, which is very lush. And they settled there. So there's a tradition of Judaism there too. But
just
what it's cool. I want to return to this.
sure.
Where some of the followers of the Atenite went, not just to the Middle East, they went to Persia. The early Persians were followers of Atenism, which eventually becomes Judaism. So here's the irony of what's going on in the world today. Today, Iran has become extreme Shia Muslim, hates Israel, who are Jews. And yet, at one time, Persia was the friend of Israel. Persia fought against the Greeks invading Israel. Persia was considered the enemies of the native Egyptians in those days because they were friendly to the Hebrews. So this is the irony. At one time, all of Persia were following a pre-Judaic religion, Mosaic teachings, before they became Christian and then became Muslim. And here they are today, enemies that want to kill each other, and they were once following the same religion.
What is your thoughts on what happened? I know the story of Muhammad came out, I believe, the 6th or 7th century, and that's when he had founded the religion. Was this a split in brotherhoods or teachings, and one went off and started their own religion based on the same teachings, and they now became, or they were enemies, and of course became more fierce enemies, and this is what we're seeing today?
You're actually putting a hit on it. I mean, what happens, you get Judaism. Judaism, for a while, is much more widespread than we ever thought it was, but never really takes off as a major movement. And so Christianity comes in to fill a gap where they feel that Judaism had failed to, again, if you follow the teachings of Jesus, he never said he came to start a new religion. In fact, he stands up at 13 in front of the rabbis in the synagogue, blows their mind with his knowledge of Torah, and says, I have not come to forsake the laws of Moses, but to fulfill them. So he never he never preached against Judaism. It's his followers that form Christianity. Jesus would not have been a Christian. He would not have followed Christianity today. So, does the same thing happen with Muhammad? Supposedly. Interesting thing about Muhammad is he's very hard to establish as a historical figure. So is Jesus. I once attended a doctoral presentation at the University of California at Berkeley by an African American who was essentially, his doctorate was that Jesus didn't exist, that he was a myth created about a great Greek healer named Apollonius of Tyana. That was his thesis. I don't agree. I see there's evidence that there was a man that it was based on, same as Moses. And I believe same as Muhammad. But again, you cannot prove. I once would say to Hakim, what if I went, now here's how it was. Muhammad did not read or write, so there's no writing. Neither did Jesus, neither did Moses. Isn't that interesting? All the founders of these religions never wrote anything. It's always the students who did the writing. So Muhammad had a devoted disciple named Abu Bakr, which means little camel. Abu Bakr meditated with Muhammad in the caves, and Muhammad supposedly then got the divine straight from Allah in the cave, and he dictated to Abu Bakr. And Abu Bakr didn't write either. Abu Bakr had a couple of disciples. One man was named Uthman, is Osran, and there's another one named Ali, and another one named Omar. They become the great caliphs. They're called the four caliphs of Islam.
And sometimes they say the descendants of the Jews and the Israelites are essentially America. Do you find any truth in that?
Now, again, where did the lost tribes go? Where did the 12 tribes get scattered? They got scattered all over the planet. So that's why Hakim would say, who at one time or another has not been a Jew? Because the Jews were all over the place. But to continue this, Abu Bakr, he dictates to Osran or Uthman. He writes the Quran. The first line of the Quran is, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the only one true prophet. That is the basis of declaring yourself a Sunni Muslim. First form of Muslim is the Sunni. But you have these other caliphs, other disciples. You have Ali. Ali supposedly married the daughter of Muhammad. And when Muhammad's passed, Ali changes it. He decides he's going to form his own teaching. So he changes the first line of the Quran to say, there is no God but Allah, and Ali is the only one true prophet. That becomes the Shiites. So you see why they hate each other?
Yeah, and who are our allies? The Sunnis?
The Sunnis are saying the Shiites are kafir, which means they're unholy because they have replaced Muhammad the prophet. So anybody that, again, if you know about Sunni extremism, you draw a cartoon of Muhammad, you have your head cut off. You say a bad word about Muhammad, you have your tongue cut out. I mean, this is the Sunni extremism. So they consider the Shia to be the worst enemies in the world. The truth of the matter is, in the last 1,300 years, there have been more Muslims killed by Muslims than by Jews and Christians magnified. They've been fighting since 1300 years. Sunni, Shia. Same thing. What did we happen in Protestantism? The Protestants say, no, the Catholic Church doesn't have it right. Everybody should have catechism. Everybody should be able to take indulgences. No, we're going to start. So then the Catholics hurt the Christians, the Protestants, and you have 100 years war. You have killing. Jews, it's almost the same thing. The Orthodox hate the conservative and the Reform.
And then now you have the Zionists as well, right?
The Zionists are the ultra extremes. Zionists are not even part of Judaism. There's nothing in the Torah that says that land belonged to Israel. Nothing. They have created this myth over 100 years ago. Zionism is not Judaism. It is as bad as Islamic State or Al-Qaeda is in Islam, which does not represent Islam. The Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, all of this nonsense of these extremists do not represent Islam. But still, the religions have led to this. So the religions have been the fertile ground for this type of murder and killing, all in the name of God. My God is better than your God, so I can kill you.
It sounds like it's all boiling up to one final showdown. Do you see that happening in the future, unfortunately, or do you see, it's always darkest before the dawn, as we both have said?
Yeah, but I have seen the changes. Hakim taught me to be able to look beyond the veil, to look every day in the papers to see some archaeological site found around the world, some statement, buried in the news, always buried in the news, some find, something which shows the consciousness is raising. What hits the headlines is the murder, the decapitations, blah, blah, blah. But what's behind the scenes, yes. Hakim was, again, I never met anyone in my life who was less afraid to go to the other side than he was. He understood that consciousness continues, that the body is just a vehicle. He had no fear of death whatsoever, and that's how he passed. He gave us that example in his actual passing. He passed totally conscious. And he passed without any pain and suffering and just went over. And he said he was totally convinced. His sense of assuredness and authority is what sticks with me today, that these changes are inevitable. Nothing can stop the change. So it's going to happen that these religions are going to fade out. And it is the youth. It's always the young people. I watch what the kids are doing, what they're saying. Reason why we have gay marriage now. Reason why we have this and that. And all these things are dropping away is because of the young people. And it will be that more people are leaving the churches as ever. Less young people are becoming more fundamentalistic religious. I see this in Egypt. I see this in America. I see this all over the world. So yes, sometimes it's hard to see. Sometimes it seems like we take one step forward but 2 steps back. But not so. I do see the progression. I do see people working up all around the world. I once gave a talk in front of 400 people where I said this same statement. I said, Hakim would say that people are going to wake up in the middle of the night and know something they did not know before. And I looked in the audience, and there were 2 women, and one woman was elbowing her friend like, see, I told you. That's the confirmation I get. If I'm talking with you today, and there's only 1 or 2 people in this whole audience that get what we're saying, and it makes a change, and maybe they want to come to Egypt with me, or maybe they want to read the book, or maybe they want to tune into your show again and listen to the other guests you talk to, that's the victory. That's the victory. We get it from every little phase, every little pit of light that we can put through this darkness. We continue. And I go every day up a roller coaster. When I listen to the news and I see all the negativity and all what they're putting out in the negativity, how the media tries to keep people in dichotomy, in separation, us and them, hate the Muslims again. We have to go now with anti-Islamic fever is really hitting a pitch now in the U.S. It's back to 2001. Are we going to go into war again? Are we going to go on the ground in Syria and Iraq? Again. You have to get past that, because that is there to confuse people, to lead you astray. And you have to see that there are things happening in the world all the time that are bringing people together, raising consciousness. And that's what we focus on.
What are your thoughts on a secret power? I know you had mentioned the Illuminati and people being misunderstood on exactly who the Illuminati is. And, there'll be people that talk about bankers, the Rothschilds, or these various secret factions behind the royal seats and the presidents. Is there any type of secret inner spiritual organization watching this flow forward and are helping pull the strings of humanity, or are we ruled by a military-industrial complex?
We're told there are.
Okay.
We're told the Rosicrucians, you talk about what they call the invisible college. We talk about so-called ascended masters, the names that people might have heard, like El Morya, Dwalkul, Kutumi, that these are ascended masters who've been in human form, who've gone on to a higher level, that come back to work to assist humanity to the light. Rosicrucians believe that. This is why the Rosicrucians continue. These organizations can believe that there is the invisible that's going against the visible, which is the power elite, the Bilderbergers, the so-called 100 families that rule the world, the billionaires, etc., etc. There supposedly is the opposite forces for the light that working in opposite, and they will win because the others are only dealing with material power and things that they can appreciate only on this plane. Well, who's going to take? What good is it to be worth $100 billion? Can you take that with you? No, you want to leave it for your family. This is why they create these laws that they don't have to pay taxes, that they can keep families being billionaires by inheriting all this wealth. But this is not going to continue. Again, U.S. is back to the same period it was in the 1880s and it was in the late 1920s. When we had one economic collapse in 2008, there will be another one coming. But things have to balance out. I mean, we had all the billionaires running the country in the 1880s, and they finally had the robber barons. They finally had to be brought down. The billionaires were running the country in the 20s until the stock market crashed, and they had to be brought down. It's going to have to compensate. It's going to have to readjust.
Do you believe those are manufactured events by the hidden hand, just knocking them out like pawns?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes.
No, I agree with you. No,
Yes.
it would be nice to see again. I know there's been rumors on TV recently, just this week, about another real estate and mortgage crisis
Exactly.
coming. So
But they haven't changed. They're still doing the same bundling. They're still doing the same thing that they did in 2008. It hasn't changed.
And I know Bernanke had came out recently, and I know they were talking when this was occurring in 2007, 2008, 2009, that it was just a mild recession. And then now he's saying it was greater than the Great Depression, which is interesting. And I know that we have those social programs in place now that keep people off the streets and starving in the streets, such as welfare. So there's things to hide it, and then banking shadow inventory and so forth. Well, I've learned a lot from you today, Stephen, and I know the audience has as well. Before we wrap up the show today, can you tell the audience where is the best place they can find your books and your great work?
Great, yes, and I do want to talk about two websites. I talked about the first one. I also want to talk about I'm about to, in 2 weeks, departing for the first time to Peru and Bolivia, which has been the highest on my bucket list. And because I'm working with a man named Brian Foster, I think you said you have interviewed or would like to interview.
Yes, I have him. I've had him on my show. Great guy.
Brian's great. So his website for people, because there's videos of me, there's www.hiddeninca.tours.com. Hiddeninca.tours.com. He also, Brian, joins us in Egypt next March. We will be having what we call March 8th to 21st, the third techno-spiritual tour. That's at the Kemetology.com website. And again, we constantly show people, we're going to discuss a lot about religion, a lot about Akhenaten and Amarna, like we discussed today. We'll show you all this incredible evidence that we have of advanced machining, advanced knowledge and technology. And like I said, I'm really looking forward to maybe coming back and talk with you again after doing Peru and Bolivia, because we believe that there definitely was a connection between very ancient Kemet and ancient Peru and Bolivia, sites like Pumapunku, Tiahuanacu, sites in Cusco that are way, way pre-Incan and we believe pre-cataclysmic. So that's what we're doing. We're looking at evidence of pre-cataclysmic sites all around the world. I mean, older than 12,000 years, that showed advanced knowledge and technology. And I say all around the world, because another phrase I'd like to leave you in the audience with is, we always say the oceans were not barriers, they were highways.
Wow, that's great. That's a great way to leave the audience and myself today, Stephen. It's been a great pleasure speaking with you today. I'd love to have you on again in the near future. We could talk about those crystal skulls and your work after you come back from the Hidden Inca tours. And I highly recommend to the audience, I watched your work and I followed your work for several years now, Stephen. You're one of the best out there. Then also Brian Forrester as well. So that would be an awesome team to see. And I know he's going with you in Egypt in the future. And I'd love for myself and my wife to maybe go if we could afford it, which I feel if you make a date and you set it and you save the money, anybody could afford it if they make it happen. So
I agree. You put that intention there. You start seeing yourself there. I'd love to see you come with us next March. We'll talk a lot about the origins of religion again on this tour. That would be great. I always tell people, just put the intention out there. I'm going, and let the universe catch up.
That's how it happens. And again, thank you for being on the show today, and I wish you the best of luck in life and business and in everything you do, Stephen.
Thank you so much, Mo. It was a pleasure to talk to you today.
All right, take care. Bye.